counter offer we ended up accepting, and I met my husband.
At that time, immigration is what formed this country. You know, it was all these different ideas and different philosophies.
My father and David were like two peas in a pod. They loved each other. Gloria will tell you they absolutely loved each other.
So the question that you have to ask yourself is not only do you have to challenge yourself to remember this history, but you also have to ask yourself, who will write yours?
And that's where home plate was. And if you hit it to left field, there was a chicken coop in left field.
I'm Gloria Heaton. I live in Egg Harbor Township, and I was born in 1950 in Philadelphia.
And I'm Ellen Wetzel, and I live in Galloway, New Jersey, and I was born in 1954.
Yeah, my brother David, he was born in Austria in 1946, I believe. He's 4 years older than me, and unfortunately he passed away in 2020. But he was in Reisterstown, Maryland, and that is where he raised his family. He had two sons and his wife, who was a child of two Holocaust survivors, and they made their life in Maryland.
My brother was 3 years older than me, and you know, we really, he was the jokester of the family, so he was very much like our dad, and our parents were both Holocaust survivors. They were both from Poland, but they were from different areas of Poland. My mom was from Włodzimierz-Wolenski, Poland, which was on the border of the Ukraine and Poland, and she had grandparents who also lived in Rubieszów. And after the war, the borders changed, so her experience in the Holocaust was in that part of Poland, while our dad was from Zembrów, Poland. And they met after the war. My mom was trying to go to Israel, but could not get to Israel, and ended up in Austria, where my father also ended up. My mom and dad were both in displaced persons camps, but my dad had an experience where he was sort of not in a rooming place, but another building, and my mom went to work there to help in the kitchen and to help do things, and met my dad through that, and they ended up getting sponsored by a relative who had the son of a relative, which they thought was a relative anyway. They were distant connections. They ended up sponsoring them to come to the United States. So that's how they ended up meeting and coming to the United States. They got married in Austria, and our brother David was born in Austria, and they came over on the SS Marine Marlin. So that's how they came over to the United States. And there's a whole story about my poor mother. She was so sick that she didn't even watch our brother because she was so sick the whole time that other people took over. You know how Mommy talks about that.
They moved to Philadelphia, and I was born in Philadelphia.
Me too.
And when I was 3, they moved to Route 50 in Laureldale. My mother has told the story, and I don't remember this, only from what she has told me, was somebody brought the information to her when they were living in Philadelphia that they were building houses in Laureldale, and she said, nobody said that they would move there unless I moved there. Now my mother, she didn't know these families, but they all decided that they weren't going to live there unless she lived there. And I guess my father and her came and spoke to the builders and built a house there. They were in Philadelphia, and they were in a little row home on Porter Street in Philadelphia. Not the best section now. I think it was better back then. But they wanted more country because that was the environment they came from. And the builders, Heaton and Trocky, who were also immigrants, they came from Poland, were builders in that area and built a lot of the homes. And almost the whole street, they were Holocaust survivors. So we all had very similar experiences, and all the families got together for card games, for dinners. They built a synagogue. So that's where we grew up. Laureldale was a small community, and it was right in the middle of Mays Landing and Egg Harbor City. I would say each of those big towns, which we thought they were huge towns at the time, were about 3 miles away on either side. Laureldale was about 2 miles long, or our section that we were familiar with, that we traveled in, was about 2 miles. And a lot of the, if you go up and down Route 50, which is what we called it Route 50. If somebody said, where do you live? We live in Route 50. All our friends were there. We would walk up and down the street, long, way. I would not let my grandson walk that distance by himself at this point of his life. But we easily did that. We would walk to almost the end of the area we were familiar with and go to synagogue, go to Hebrew school. It was like the Pied Piper. One family would start out, pick up another family, and then we would get to Hebrew school as a group.
We called it Route 50. Other people called it Laureldale, but we called it Route 50. And we all went to the same school in Mays Landing. We went to the Shaner School and the Duberson School, and we graduated from I graduated from the Duberson School. I think, did you too, Gloria?
Yeah.
Yeah, we graduated, and then we went on to Oakrest High School. But the Hebrew school was in the synagogue that we have towards the end of this stretch of road. And as we would walk, as Gloria said, we would pick up kids all along the way. And we had one Hebrew school teacher, particularly, who we all remember, who it seems like we all remember, and he would get so angry at us because we were kids and we would play around and we wouldn't listen, and it was another language, and he would bite his finger every time we got something wrong. Do you remember he used to bite his finger and he'd yell at us, but none of us cared. So we were really bad kids. But we'd be in a hurry because we'd come from school and then we'd have to hurry up and get out the door again. And as Gloria said, we walked everywhere. When we went to kids' houses to play, we had kids all around us and we were all about the same age. So that was a lot of fun. We always had somebody to play with. And we would walk to their houses on Route 50. And, we went to Henny's house and Edith's house and Toby's house and Mona's house. And, we would just be going to, and we were in and out of everybody's houses. So we knew all the families really well. And, that's the way it was.
Mm-hmm. You could tell driving through Laureldale that so many of the houses are similar in so many ways. The same brick front, they all have front porches, the attached garage with the driveway up to the garage. Everybody parked in the back. Nobody really parked in their garage.
No.
But you parked in the back and you always came in through the back. And of course, no shoes ever in your house.
Oh, yeah.
But the homes were very, very similar, and they were lovely. You could really see pride of ownership in the houses. I don't remember ever going into any house that I would say now, oh, what a mess that was. None of them were.
No,
they were just
everything
lovely.
was. The community was very tight because we were all from the majority of the people in our section of Route 50, we were all chicken farmers, and we were all children of Holocaust survivors. So we all had very similar experiences as far as speaking Yiddish at home, and raising chickens and going out and in the cold, and we didn't know any differently because that's the experience that we had. Chicken farming was a business that you could get into with very little, and you could still make a living at that time. So when they lived in Philadelphia initially, they lived above a luncheonette when they came to America, because the people who were sponsoring them got them a place in Philadelphia, and they were able to start their life there. And when they heard about the chicken farms that were going to be developed on the street on Route 50, that's when they came and they decided that they would build a home. But chicken farming was a way that people could make a living, and all the immigrants wanted to make a living, and they were laying chickens. They weren't for poultry, they weren't for meat chickens, they were egg chickens. And I don't know if you remember, Gloria, they had, when my mother primarily worked the farm. My father had another business in Hamilton Auction. So my mother primarily worked the farm, which was really, really a hard business because, it was really cold and she'd have to go out, and there were animals that would try to get the chickens. We had coops. We had 2 coops, and then we had a sick coop in the back of the 2 coops, that the sick chickens. So now when you hear about the avian flu and different things that are affecting chickens, well, the farmers on Route 50 had to deal with all of that too. But I don't know if you remember when Mommy got a load of chicks, and we had the incubators.
Yeah.
We had, I don't know if it was called an incubator, but it was like a tube, and it had a heater that went around, and we would go out to the coop, and all these little chicks would be getting warm around this. Do you remember that? And in the winter, a lot of times the water would freeze, and my mom would be out there trying to defrost the water, and it was really a hard life. But they did it because it was the business, and they made a living that way.
Mm-hmm. They didn't just let us work. That was one of our jobs. Talk about chores. That was one of them. And I remember we were taught how to candle eggs to make sure that there were no
Blood
marks
spots
in them.
Yeah.
We packed the eggs. We, weighed the eggs. We did all that. We did a lot. Sometimes we got into the coops themselves to feed the chickens, to help feed the chickens, and to pick the eggs. And that was a job I did not like, because a lot of times the chickens would be sitting on them, so you'd have to reach underneath and grab them, before the chicken could start pecking you. So it was an interesting way to grow up as a child.
It's pretty funny now. It's so funny when you go to antique stores and they have the wire baskets and they're vintage. Well, we had a lot of vintage growing up in our house. We had vintage all over the place. And, we also had a lot of land around because we had acres. We had several acres.
We had 5 acres.
And, I often say when we wanted to have fun, my brother would let a chicken out and we'd be running around after the chicken. He was so bad. It was really bad. And the house itself, we had, it was a really beautiful home. It was a rancher home. And then we had a basement as well. So we did, we played a lot in the basement, and it was just a farm life. It was really funny, but we all had very similar experiences on Route 50, I think.
Yeah.
I think we did, from talking to other people.
Yeah.
There are 2 things about Route 50 that, and Gloria will be able to relate to this. Toby Kowinski, they had a house catty corner to our house. One of the, all the houses were in proximity that we could get to. And they had 2 kitchens in their house, 2 full kitchens. And the way that the house was designed, that's how they did it, because it was Sheila Kowinski and Joel, and then Harold and Toby. They were one family, and then Sheila's mother and father lived with them as well. But the one thing that they wanted was a separate kitchen. So when we would go over, they would, they'd have a living room, a common living room area, and their bedrooms were separate and all. But it was very interesting because, for women of that age, that was important, that they took pride in having their own cooking and, recipes. That was a really big thing, even in the camps, even, during the war. They said, from different things that I've been told, that the women would try to keep themselves very connected to their recipes. And they would talk about, how did you make a filter fish, and how did you make this, and how did you, and that was very important. So that was the only home on Route 50 that I remember that was like that.
Kitchens, yeah.
And the other thing about Route 50 that I wanted to make sure that we talked about was our brother's bar mitzvah. And that was really an experience, because I remember, and I don't know if Gloria does, we had all the bar mitzvahs were in the synagogue, and the synagogue was really tiny. It was a really small shul, and we didn't call it synagogue, we called it shul. We were going to shul, and everything was. They had a tiny little foyer, a real tiny little foyer, like a coat thing when you walked in, and the parents, the women would get all dressed up, and they put fur stoles on and fur coats and things, and high heels. And 10 seconds after they got there, they couldn't wear the high heels because they were really uncomfortable. So they would take off their shoes, and us kids would go in the foyer, and there were a lot of us, and we would be in there trying shoes on, tottering around in these high heels. And we were little kids. My brother was 7 years older than me, so I was 6 when he had his bar mitzvah, and Gloria was, so we would be in there playing around. But this one image that I have that I hope I always remember, my mother had this bowl, like a silver bowl, and it had little hot dog wieners, little cocktail wieners in it, but they didn't cut them. So it was like a string. Do you remember this?
Yes.
There was a string of these little hot dogs. And my brother, being my brother, took one of the ends, and I still remember he's running across the synagogue floor with the string of hot dogs behind him, and my mother's chasing him, screaming, "David, David, stop, stop!" And here he is running around, and she's chasing him with these hot dogs. I thought she was going to strangle him when she caught up with him. I don't know if you remember that, but he was so bad, but he was so funny.
He was very funny. He would make a joke out of anything.
Everything. So, but all the kids were so funny, and we never had bat mitzvahs. That was another thing. Route 50, I don't know anybody who had bat mitzvah. Was not even, that wasn't even a word at that time that we grew up with. So, but all the kids had their bar mitzvahs.
The holidays, my mother always cooked and prepared for the holidays. She had beautiful, beautiful dishes that her and my father had brought over from Europe, and just made mountains of food. And we always did the synagogue. We always went to synagogue for the holidays, and
we had, but some of the foods, my mother made cholent,
very traditional.
Made kishke. I don't know if you know what kishke is. It's stuffed intestines. And, and sometimes I'll ask my husband, and I'll say, "Oh, you want me to make kishke?" And he'll look at me and go, "Yeah, okay." But cholent, it used to cook. It was meat and potatoes and carrots, and it would be on the stove all night.
Yeah.
It was on a low fire or in the oven, you know, and my mom made everything, noodle kugel, she made kugel, she made potato kugel latkes for Hanukkah. We always had the best latkes. She really cooked all the traditional foods, the stuffed cabbage. What else did Mommy? Oh, she used to make the pletzlach, you know, the onion rolls.
Yeah.
And blintzes. She would do the shell. And not that long ago, a few years ago, when we could see that it, you know, that we might not have the opportunity, we had gotten, David and I, my husband and I, went on a search for pot cheese, because that's what you used to make blintzes with. Well, I'm telling you, we covered New Jersey and parts of Pennsylvania to find this pot cheese. And finally, we found a kind of like a farmer's cheese that worked. And my mom, I think we have pictures of that, my mother standing at the stove making the shells, you know, the crepes to do the blintzes.
Yeah.
But every holiday, we had all of the traditional foods.
And the two of us still tried to do that for the holidays. You know, I remember asking my mother for recipes, and it was so hard to get recipes out of her because they were all in her head. She never wrote down anything. So she'd say, oh, a little bit of flour, a couple potatoes, oh, some eggs. You know, that was the way we got recipes. So, you know, we would try to duplicate it, and she'd say, this liver's guy. I remember going on a search for chicken liver or something like that. I was making it for the first time to take to Ellen's house for Passover. And, you know, after asking her a million times, how do you make it? Oh, you throw this and you throw this and throw this. And took the liver to Ellen's house, and she said, oh, I don't use chicken liver, I use beef liver. And it was like, okay, all right, next time, Mom. But yeah.
How about with the potatoes? When she would make latkes, I did the potatoes. I grinded them, and she said, "You didn't grind them so good." And she's throwing like little pieces of, you know, the potatoes that aren't grinded. She's throwing them in the sink, saying, "This is not good. This is not good. This is not." I said, "Okay, Mom." There. So I had to grind them under supervision.
Yeah.
But we always had the traditional, what we call the traditional foods. And it's so funny because Passover, you know, Gloria has her holidays. She does Thanksgiving and I do Passover. And it's so funny, we have a friend who comes every year for Passover, and my mom supervised all the, you know, we make all the same foods. We don't deviate from any of the foods. We have a menu and that's it, we stay. And she said, I love this more than any other holiday because it's all the traditional foods. She said, all year I look forward to these foods. So, you know, we really got that. And my dad, you know, he appreciated that too. He appreciated my mom doing that because she was a really good cook for all the traditional kinds of food.
Chicken, oh my God. It was years before I would eat chicken soup because every Friday a chicken went in the pot. And we would have chicken, and we would have chicken soup, and we would have chicken salad, everything chicken for a whole week.
Boiled chicken.
Yeah, and then the following Friday, another chicken went in the pot, and it would start all over, the whole rotation of chicken. My father sold, he sold eggs and chickens. That was part of his business. So he would go to Philadelphia. He would bring home. They were different kinds of chickens, so he would bring home chickens for the soup.
They didn't keep kosher, but we literally never had pork ever that I remember. And Gloria will tell you, to this day, I have never made. Not to say that I keep kosher or anything, but. You know, I've never made like a pork roast or anything like that. It's just, it never happened in our house. So they didn't have separate dishes or anything like that, but my mother
They
said,
did for the holidays.
But yeah, but they tried.
Holidays.
I mean, my mother tried, but she didn't really keep kosher, but we never had any kind of pork products in our home growing up.
My mom moved into Mays Landing My parents divorced when I was in 8th grade, which was something that didn't happen on the farm. So they were among the first to sell the farm. At that point, they weren't farmers anymore. They weren't chicken farmers anymore. They had liquidated the farm, sold off, you know, whatever they had to sell off. So they were both doing different things. But my mom moved into Mays Landing in town, and we had a different kind of life then. It wasn't walking up and down Route 50. It was meeting our friends and walking into town where there were little stores and shops, and being in high school and doing activities in high school. So we were typical teenagers doing what teenagers do, branching out on our own. My mother, because she was working, we became very responsible for getting our work done. A lot of times she would work at night. She would work a night shift. So she had to leave the house about dinner time. So she would always cook us dinner. We would have dinner. We had to clean up. We had to do our homework. We had to practice our piano lessons. And then we had to get ourselves to bed and, you know, pretty much take care of ourselves when she was working. So we kind of became what kids are now, unfortunately, with working parents, with 2 working parents, except, you know, we had my mom and then we had my dad, who we would go and visit. My father, as Ellen mentioned, had the Hamilton Mart. He was one of the partners. And it's funny, I was telling somebody about this. He had a huge rotisserie machine. He had one of the stands. He was one of the owners, but he also had a stand. And had a huge rotisserie machine and would do rotisserie chickens. He was like way ahead of his time. And if we were lucky, we would get one on Sundays. He sold out almost every single week. People would come and buy them. He also would load up the car with eggs and go to Philadelphia and sell them to businesses. He sold to Atlantic City businesses, eggs and chickens. And when I was in college, I went to ACC my first 2 years. I lived with my dad, and I remember him we lived on the Black Horse Pike. We had moved at that point, quite a while before that. But I remember him selling chickens and having me cut them up. He only asked me to do that a couple times. But he had various businesses, but they were always poultry related. Even when he had a store in Atlantic City, he sold fruits and vegetables, a few little dry goods, things like that. But chickens and eggs were a big part of that business. My mother, she did the eggs, she did the farm, and then when she worked in a factory afterwards for several years, and then she went into retail and worked up on the boardwalk. She worked at ShopRite, she worked, you know, on the boardwalk at one of the gift shops for years and managed that. So they did other things. She was pretty amazing, though. You know, my mother was an amazing seamstress. She could sew anything and just made curtains and bedspreads and gorgeous gowns with all kinds of embellishment to them. Used to fix things for us all the time. She went to hairdressing school and learned how to cut hair. So she did all kinds of stuff. She was very, very artistic and very creative.
But a lot of the people from Route 50 started to transition out of Route 50 and started to move. And, you know, once they were settled and then they started to move, and that's how they moved to Ventnor, they moved to Margate, and the street became different. So our parents eventually moved as well and did other things, because the goal, they had started out as chicken farmers, but that was not the goal to stay as chicken farmers. It was just to get started. You know, that was the whole goal, to try to develop into other more prosperous things to do. So they worked really hard. You know, it was constant. They were always working. We never remember our parents not working. And I think we've pretty much picked up on that work ethic as well. I hope, you know, to honor them and ourselves, because it's really important. We were really good friends with all the kids on the street, and we all had so much in common. And I was particularly friends with Henny. You were really good friends with Toby,
And
and
Edith.
Edith, and we were all. And even to this day, when we see each other, it's like no time passed. We haven't.
We stayed friends.
We've stayed friends. We haven't kept in touch the way a lot of people would like to, because life kind of gets in the way. But when we see each other, it's like no time has passed. But I had a friend from school who became a really, really good friend, Mary, my friend Mary, and Mary Nello, and she had a family in Mays Landing. And I met her when I was in kindergarten. So we had gone to kindergarten and became really good friends. So because of that, because she was Catholic and I was a really good friend of hers, I got invited to everything. So I went for the Seven Fishes dinner on Christmas Eve. I went to midnight mass in Latin. I can't tell you how many times, because every year I would go to her Aunt Christine and Uncle Sam's house, the Rapicis, and I would go for their dinner and with her mom Jane and Mary. And Mary had lost her father when she was 8 years old, and it was her mom and Mary, and then her aunt and uncle were really close. But I got included, so everything that they did, even going to church and things, I got to go too. So it was really an interesting way to grow up. But the interesting thing, because we were in Mays Landing at that point, as time went on, and we lived in Mays Landing when I was, I guess, 11. I guess I must have been about 11. We would buy all of our gifts at the corner drugstore. They had a drugstore, and that was like our shopping center, this one particular drugstore. And I still remember going in there and buying, because I had to buy a Christmas gift for Aunt Jane and for Aunt Christine. So I would go in there, and I still remember buying a little sugar dish or a little creamer, because that's the kind of stuff that the drugstore had. They had little gifty kinds of things. But that was very interesting. But the interesting thing was that our parents never said, don't go. They never said, oh no, don't go. You have to be worried. They're not Jewish. It was never, ever, ever like that. It was, yes, whatever we did, Mary was included. Whatever Mary did, I was included. And when I think about that as an adult, when I realized it, I said, that is really incredible that they were not afraid, because of what they had lived through, to not be afraid for us to interact with people of other faiths and other religions. And so when people talk about diversity today, I think, wow, we had diversity back, when I grew up, because we went to school in Mays Landing, and even though we went with a lot of Jewish kids, predominantly they were not Jewish kids. So we interacted with everyone, and I don't know if you do, I never remember mommy or daddy ever questioning.
Well, okay, when I was in high school going to the prom, I remember introducing my prom date to my father, and my father saying, "Is he Jewish?" He was really a stickler on that. And I said, oh, yeah. Well, my prom date was blonde hair and blue-eyed. And my dad just looked at me and goes, okay. And never said another word about it, ever, ever. The only time I kind of felt weird was, and of course, the Holocaust survivors' kids. We all grew up together, so we all hung out together, but we hung out with everybody. was when we were younger and during Passover, we all sat together at a table away from the other kids because of dietary issues. Like, we didn't want to mix the bread with the matzah. We brought our own lunches and we sat there and didn't eat the other stuff. And it was so weird that we were put at this separate table. And I know it was because they didn't want to mix up our food with all the other food or have us eat somebody else's lunch. But it was just a weird feeling to be sitting separate. It's like, oh, look at those kids over there. But yeah, other than that, I don't remember ever feeling weird because of who my friends were or the fact that we were survivors' kids. We were just part of the whole makeup of the school. They spoke Yiddish and we learned Yiddish. That was our first language. When they didn't want us to know what they were talking about, they spoke Polish. So that was one I never learned. I don't know if you did either.
No.
Because
Couple
on purpose.
words.
I mean, they didn't want us to know Polish. But my mother was very quick to learn English. She wanted to be Americanized, and she wanted to learn the language, and she wanted to dress the way other people dressed, and she decorated her home beautifully, but she was very traditional also. So
our dad spoke Yanglish. We used to tease him that he spoke a combination of Yiddish and English. And when he would speak, and especially with David, my husband, he didn't speak any Yiddish. So my father would speak to him, and David would turn to me and say, "What did your father say?" And then I would tell him, and then my father would talk. And my father and David were like a two peas in a pod. They loved each other. Gloria will tell you they absolutely loved each other. And he'd say, "What did your father say?" And one day my father gave him a zatz. He hit him and he said, "What's the matter with you? I'm speaking Yanglish." So it was so funny. He never learned. People would come in. He had a little market called Kaplan's Market in Ventnor, and for several years, and people would come in and they'd be speaking all these different languages. And my father would be speaking everything but English. They'd be speaking Yiddish or Polish or or whatever, and it was so funny. But
most probably more because our friends' parents and our parents had accents. You didn't hear accents. Everybody was American around us, everybody in school, everybody in the stores, when we watched TV, when we saw movies. So we knew that there was a difference because of the accents and also the different languages that they spoke. We didn't think it was different. We didn't think we were different because so many of our friends had the same experiences as we did. They never talked about being Holocaust survivors. I don't remember my parents ever saying we were survivors and this is what we went through until I was in my 20s and had got married. And my father had driven down to where I was living at the time, and we were having dinner. I had cooked dinner, and all of a sudden he said, "Okay, when I was in concentration camp," I knew he was in concentration camp. I knew he was in Auschwitz. He had the numbers on his arm, but he never, ever spoke about it. And then just started telling my husband and I stories. And I sat there with my mouth open because I had never, ever heard him talk about this before. And you could see the sadness. He never talked about his family before us. He never talked about relatives that he had in Poland ever, and nor did my mother. It was like little holes, in memories and our information about our parents, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people don't have a whole lot of information about their parents, even American parents, but we wanted to know because we knew that our life was a little bit different from a lot of other lives around us, but we weren't given that information when we were young and growing up.
We always knew we were children of Holocaust survivors. I don't remember how we knew, but you know, like Gloria said, you know, our parents spoke different languages. They did have all, you know, and everyone around them who they surrounded themselves with were also survivors. So we knew that, but I think it was when I was much older and really now that I realized how our lives were so different because we didn't have grandparents, we had no aunts, we had no uncles, we had no cousins, we had no one. Our family was our family, and we had some people in Philadelphia who our parents referred to as relatives, but we were never really 100% sure that they really were. It's kind of like when my kids were growing up, you know, they called my friend Mary, Aunt Mary, you know, that kind of thing. So we were different in that respect because most of our friends had somebody, like even, you know, Mary had Aunt Teen and Uncle Sam, and, you know, but we had none of those connections. So for our kids, and, you know, we often say how lucky our kids are because, you know, they have had the experience of grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, and, you know, that's normal to them. But it was normal to us too, not to, until we realized that other people had all of these connections that we didn't have. So that when I think about that, I think about how fortunate, you know, our own kids are that they have all of that, but they don't realize it. I mean, they're thankful for it, but they are thankful in a different way than we are. But we've always, you know, we've always experienced life as children of Holocaust survivors, and that's, you know, my father had a 2-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son who were killed in Auschwitz, and his wife and all of his relatives, and we have, you know, we've talked about documentation for that, and it's kind of like their lives started after the war, for as far as we were concerned, because it was so difficult for them to share, and it was so difficult for us to ask, even when we got older. And people say to me now, well, why didn't you ask? Why didn't you ask your father this and your mother this? And it's very difficult to have them understand that when you know something will cause someone pain, as much as you want to know, sometimes the time is not right, and you just don't find the right moment to create that pain, because there's no way not to cause pain. So it's something that we live with, you know. It's
when they shared, it was a gift. It wasn't something that we pulled out of them. But my father was very, very closed about it. And when he shared, it was such a gift to find out anything about that time in his life.
For my parents, it was very, very important for them to assimilate into the culture that they were coming into. And I think that was really important. And my mom particularly, you know, I think she really wanted to fit in. She was younger than my dad, and, you know, being a woman, she wanted to fit in, you know, with a different, you know, different people. And, you know, I think for women, the way that they dressed, the way that they presented themselves, you know, with their hair, their makeup, you know, that was important. Well, as for my dad, not so much. She would sit and do our homework with us, not because we couldn't do our homework, but she wanted to really learn the language, and she wanted to be independent in that way. And I still remember this one project that we had to do. We had to make a map, do a map of the United States, and we had to draw it freehand. And I drew a map and colored it in, and she drew a map and colored it in, because she really wanted to learn. While my dad was, you know, he kind of was comfortable with speaking Yenglish and not particularly.
And he was out making a living.
Yeah,
he wasn't home a whole lot.
Yeah, and even though our mom worked, she was home. So it was a whole different thing.
And it was funny because my mother was meticulous with the way she dressed and did her hair, and I mean, very, very stylish, and the high heels and the whole thing. My father smoked a cigar, and every time he would put something on, he would smoke a cigar, his stomach would stick out, and he would have like little holes going down the front of his clothing. And every single thing he owned had these little holes going down the front of his clothing. And there's my mother, the fashion plate, and there's my dad with the holes going down the front of his clothing.
Tot, you're going to set yourself on fire. It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But
everybody loved my father.
He was so funny.
My brother was so much like him.
Oh, exactly.
And always making jokes and always, you know, saying funny things. He had a store in Atlantic City, and customers would come in and he would make funny comments, but he would make them in Yiddish. And we would go running to the back of the store because we didn't want to laugh with the customers there. But you know, he was always making jokes and using his language, you know, which he knew we understood, but other people didn't. He was a funny guy.
But it was important, and you know, even from an education point of view, to become Americanized, we had, and this was important to us. And nowadays, you know, I recognize it, that how special it was. We had 2 sets of encyclopedias. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica and the Book of Knowledge.
Yeah.
And we had a room in our house that we would have these 2 sets of encyclopedias. And we would sit on the floor and just turn to a page. And the thing that I remember the most was the anatomy pages. They were cellophane, and they had like the one person, and then you would be able to flip everything, so you'd learn the circulatory system and the pituitaries, whatever it was. And we would just spend hours just looking at these encyclopedias. And here, when you think about it, our parents did not, this was when we were really young, and they hardly spoke English. And yet, they bought 2 sets of encyclopedias in our house. It was so important. The education in America, to be educated, was so important to both of our parents. Even though our dad was not that involved in it, he was very supportive of it. And you know, my mom was really the one, even though if you asked my mom today, even if she remembered everything, what college did we graduate from? I don't know.
Never saw her colleges.
I mean, she came to the graduations. She, you know, she did that. But you know, if you said what, they graduated. You know, but it was really. But being Americanized was really, really important to fit into the culture, not to create a separate environment. You know, that you have to do everything the way that I did. They wanted to be Americans, and we're very proud of that. We're proud of their citizenship. We're proud that they studied for that, and you know, that was a really important thing to them. We're proud of voting. You know, I always remember them taking part, even if they weren't 100% knowledgeable about something. They really wanted America to be their home, and they were very appreciative to be in America. I think, weren't they? I never remember ever a time that they weren't very proud.
No.
You know, very thankful that they came to America.
And they were on top of things.
My dad, Daddy especially.
Yeah.
His language wasn't that good, but he never missed watching the world news.
Or reading the newspaper every day.
Yeah. But he read the Yiddish paper.
Yeah.
The
but
Vorwärts.
still. But I remember standing in line outside when they were doing the polio vaccine. I mean, there were hundreds of people in line. My parents were right there with us. You know, they were right on top of things, knowing what needed to be done.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, I wanted to tell you a story about that too. You know, going to Mays Landing School, we had a principal. His name was William Davies, and you might be familiar. You know, we have the William Davies Middle School, and it's named after William Davies. So in 1989, I got hired by Hamilton Township Public Schools, and I was a social worker on their child study team, and Gloria was a learning consultant for Oakcrest at the time. So Leonard Sloda was my principal at Shaner School, and I was with my new supervisor, Dottie Dammer, and we're walking down the hall. So Dottie and I are walking down the hall in 1989, and I had just been hired, and I think it was October, so school had just started in September, and we're walking down the hall, and two people are walking towards us, Mr. Sloda and another gentleman who I did not really remember. So Mr. Sloda stops, and he says to this gentleman, he says, "Do you know who this is?" And he looks at me, and of course he doesn't, because this is 1989, and I was born in 54, you know, so this is how many years later. And Mr. Sloda says to me, "This is Mr. Davies." And I looked at him and I said, "Mr. Davies?" And I totally didn't recognize him. So Mr. Davies says, "Oh my goodness," he says, "Ellen Kaplan." He said to my supervisor, he says, "Do we have time to sit down? I'd like to talk to Ellen." So my supervisor, who doesn't even, you know, I don't know her, she doesn't really know me, and here it's a month into school, and we go into the teacher's lounge, and nobody's in there, and Mr. Davies says, tell me about the kids. Tell me about, who do you know about?" So I start going down the street thinking, okay, you know, this one did this one did this one became a doctor, this one became a lawyer, this one, this one became a teacher, this one, and I'm trying to remember everything to tell him. And Mr. Davies stops, and he says, and I get emotional when I think of this. He said, "Never in the history of Hamilton Township schools, before and after, did we ever have a group of children and a group of parents like the Holocaust children and parents." And he said, we never before and never after have had a group of parents and children like this. And he's telling Mr. Sloda and Ms. Stammer about this, and he said there was not one meeting that the parents didn't come to. There was not one he said none of the kids got in trouble. The kids all came to school, and I don't know if you remember anybody getting into trouble ever. And he said everybody came to school. He said they weren't absent, they did their homework. And he said the parents came for every meeting, and he said they didn't understand. He said many of them didn't speak English, and he said all the kids came with the parents to all the meetings because the parents didn't speak English, and they had to have translators. And he said that wave of immigration was never repeated in the history of Hamilton Township schools. And I still remember my supervisor, it was like you could feel that she suddenly, that she understood, you know, because she didn't really know me and I didn't really know her. But I think it changed our relationship for all the years that we worked together, with him saying that, and him, you know, and Mr. Sloda, who had been in the district for a long time, said, "You know, you're right." So I was so proud of that I was a part of that wave.
I get very excited when Stockton does something new, more, digs deeper. Because I'm 74 years old. I don't remember everything. Oh, I'm sorry. It brings back a lot of information, and I'm just so happy that that information is there for my children and my grandchildren, because the younger they get, the less they know. And I want them to continue knowing things. And I remember my son doing projects on the Holocaust because he has that strong tie. Not like we do, but he still has that strong tie, knowing that his grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And I love Stockton. I'm so glad that, everybody is here to do what they're doing. It's so important.
Yeah, it's really, Stockton has been a gift because it's so respectful, helping us share, and it's such a big obligation. It really is an obligation that we need to remember our parents and have other people remember what our parents and all the survivors really went through, because it just, there are a lot of things that we've learned through, not necessarily through our parents, because they didn't always speak about things, but the things that they have shared, it's important for us to share too. And Stockton has really, really worked so hard to connect what we can share with other people. And that's really been so important to us. And it's really an honor for us to really have Stockton do the things that they do, because they just work so hard. Everyone who's connected with the Holocaust Resource Center, and with Michael and Gail, the memory of Gail and Irvin and Brett. It's just amazing, the work that's been done. But it really is an obligation that it's not always that easy. I have to admit, and Gloria knows it's not always that easy. But it's like the survivors who come forward too. It's not easy for them either. So, I feel if they can share, who are we not to?